It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person is torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, g'day, listeners, and welcome once again to The Two Jacks. It's episode 73 of our amalgamated studies of the world and things in Australia. And joining me, as usual, is Hong Kong Jack, all the way in Hong Kong. Got the feet up today, mate? Another public holiday?
Tomorrow's a public holiday. This one is... It's always written here on official documents as the birthday of the Buddha, but it's commonly known as Buddha's birthday.
Buddha's birthday? That would be a fairly imprecise sort of method in determining when the great man was born.
I think here we run. There are various because
yes, there are, aren't there?
There are various ways it's done. I think we run on the Tibetan lunar calendar.
There you go. How many months in the Tibetan lunar calendar, mate?
Oh, I've no idea. I'm a little rusty on that. But yeah, no. So it's a public. Yet another.
I'll give you a bit of
holiday.
research. I'd love you to run through the months of the year in the Tibetan lunar calendar.
Yeah, that'd be handy, wouldn't it? You know.
Oh yeah. Well, look, it's something like that you'd never forget. But anyway, you got the feet up tomorrow, and you'll be able to wander down to the pub at about 4 o'clock, and the streets will be either crowded or perhaps a little quiet.
4 o'clock's a bit early for me. I might get down there about 5:30. The streets have been busier. We've had more mainland tourists, and of course the usual contingent of young Korean women taking photos of each other in front of various landmarks. Although we don't see them as landmarks, there is a sort of a mural on the wall across the road from my local pub, which is a series of shop houses painted on the side of a wall. And this appears in Instagram somewhere around the world. So every Korean girl who turns up in Hong Kong has to have her photo taken in front of it. So there'll be 50 or 60
There must be a reason for it, but
there'll be 50 or 60 of them there. To the consternation of the taxi drivers who are trying to drive up the hill, etc., etc. They're stepping out in the road. It's quite a circus.
Well, enjoy your day tomorrow, another public holiday, Buddha's birthday in Hong Kong. Look, kick yourself, Jack. You work from home, of course, don't you?
Yeah, when I work at all, yes.
Yes, when you do manage to pull yourself up into the desk chair and do a bit of work, clatter away on the keyboard there. Kurt Vonnegut, who is, I think he died in 2007, the great American author. If you want to get your hands on any of his short stories, please do. Wonderful stuff. He had a bit of a message, Jack, for those who want to work from home.
He did. And a good one, I think, an interesting one. He was explaining to his wife why he's going out to buy an envelope. She says, well, you're not a poor man. Why don't you go online and buy 100 envelopes and put them in the closet? And so I pretend not to hear her and go out to get the envelope because I'm going to have a hell of a good time in the process of buying one. I meet a lot of people and see some great-looking babies, and a fire engine goes by, and I give them the thumbs up, and I'll ask a woman what kind of dog that is, and I don't know. The moral of the story is we're here on Earth to fart around.
Fart around.
And
there
of course,
you go. So
and of course, the computers will do us out of that. And what the computer people don't realise, or they don't care, is we're dancing animals. We love to move around. And it's like we're not supposed to dance anymore at all.
Well, grim tidings. Yeah, passed away, I think, in 2007. Kurt Vonnegut, wonderful writer. You know what else he said, Jack? We will go down in history as the first society who wouldn't save itself because it wasn't cost effective.
Yes, I did read he said that. I think he's got a point about the going out to buy the envelope. I think a little bit of human contact of the cursory and nonsense nature is good for us.
Look, I think that's right. And I think there is a sense of adventure. It may not seem to many people who've got to pop down to the shops, pop down to the supermarket, that sort of thing, to be a bit of an adventure. But it is a bit. There's a nodding acquaintances. There's the people you bump into that you know. And it is a good idea to get out of the home. I work from home, and I do like getting out at least once a day into the public. But of course, you can't ignore what else he said, Jack. He said, we will go down in history as the first society who wouldn't save itself because it wasn't cost effective. And he's talking there about climate change. And we'll deal with that a little bit later on. Local news, of course, very sad news. The passing of Juan Ignacio Trapaga, Ignatius Jones, a wonderful. His life was a gift to this country in many, many ways. And I knew him in the Lads Mags. We became good friends there. He was at Picture Magazine, Jack. He was photographed in the great big powdered wig, the Isaac Newton job, and he was at Picture. He was writing the odd yarn, but he asked Pat Shield, who was the editor at the time, if he could give him a page so he could make a bit more money. And that's when they decided to call him Dr. Ignatius Jones, the big powdered wig, sex therapist and consultant frotologist to the royal family of Uganda. Studious listeners will know that there is no royal family in Uganda and there is no such thing as frotology, but that didn't ever bother anyone at the Picture. Look, he was, of course, famous / infamous for his role as the lead singer of...
Pardon me, boys?
That Pardon Me, Boys was his sort of cabaret act. This is how talented he was. He was a ballet dancer, singer, musician, and, of course... I'm just trying to think of the very famous band. My wife used to watch them fairly regularly at the Windsor Castle in Paddington. We'll get to that in a minute, of course. But, of course, towards the end of his life, in the middle of his life, he became a director of major events, including the opening and closing ceremonies of the Sydney Olympic Games. Had a wonderful feel for all of that and travelled the world doing these sorts of things. Died in the Philippines after a short illness. Very, very sad. Lived in Australia as an Australian citizen for more than 50 years. And just a wonderful life that needs to be celebrated. A bloke who didn't take himself too seriously. He told me that...
Jimmy and the Boys?
Jimmy and the Boys. Jesus Christ, what is wrong with my brain today? But yes, Jimmy and the Boys, schlock rockers from way back. The Australian had an obituary there for him where they said that Ignatius was a student at Cranbrook. Well, he wasn't, and he
wasn't he at Iggy's itself?
Yes, he was at Iggy's. That's probably, he was Ignacio. But yes, he was at Riverview, a contemporary of Tony Abbott's. And Iggy did tell me that he would have had Tony Abbott covered as Ducks of Humanities. But look, Pat and I were talking about this last week, Pat Sherl, who knew Iggy a good deal better than me. We believe that his time at Riverview may have come to a fairly abrupt end in his HSC year. And, of course, one of the band members had been to Riverview and then went on to Cranbrook, and that might have been where the confusion came from. Joylene Hairmouth, who also passed away late last year. Just a wonderful life. And the lesson is don't take yourself too seriously, ever. And live large. That's the other thing that Iggy did really well. It was a very sad day last week. I felt that enormously. All right, moving on to...
Got to have some admiration for anybody who can make a living out of doing closing ceremonies and opening ceremonies for Olympics and all that sort of stuff.
Well, the things he organised, Jack, had audiences of 4 billion, 3 billion here, the Asian Games that he did. Independence celebrations in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf nations, bicentennial, I think, celebrations in Canada. He did a lot of major productions here. There was the Man from Snowy River thing, which actually drove and this was done at one of the theme parks in Queensland, where you'd have the horses coming out, and actually drove the Olympic Games opening ceremony. He and Rick Birch Rick Birch did the opening ceremony of the LA Games. Remember, they had 100 pianos out in the ground of the stadium.
They always have been a little bit of a gay fest. The opening ceremonies, what's 100 white grand pianos? What's a bloke in a tight pair of pants shooting an arrow across the stadium in Barcelona? They really are kind of it's like a pride march, but they're great fun.
Well, he did do the gay games in Australia, and that was where he came up with the famous line, "I didn't need to come out, I was never in." So, yes, a wonderful human being. And to know him was to love him. He was just a beautiful man, and very funny, very clever. The last time I saw him, Pat and I were at his place in Surrey Hills, at his apartment there, which looked like a sort of set director's frenzy. The house there were lion skins, there were human skeletons, there were all sorts of bizarre things that he collected along life's journey. And Pat and I, of course, we're not actors, but we were filming a little bit of a promo for the Fine Cotton Fiasco, the book. And he came over, tut-tutted us with terrible delivery and gave us a few tips while we filmed at his place. His bedroom was encased in the hull of a boat in this apartment block in Surrey Hills. Unique and totally unapologetic for being different. And I think that's the lovely message about Ignatius Jones. Moving on, Jack, we have the budget being delivered tonight. I believe something like a $9 billion surplus. And a lot of the equations are based on the government, not based on the government, but based on forecasts of inflation being around a 2 to 3% band, a bit higher than that at the moment. Reserve Bank doesn't agree, but that's where we are.
Yeah, the Treasurer and Treasury estimates are predicting a 2.75% number by the end of the year, which puts it inside the 2 to 3% band.
The comfort zone.
The Reserve Bank is charged with trying to keep it in that zone and therefore doesn't tend to take action like raising interest rates when it is in that zone. So that's the plan. And Chalmers has been quite open about that being what he expects to happen. I was a bit sort of curious as to why he's going in quite so hard on that. It's very hard to predict where these things are going to go.
Yeah, because it's subject to global economic forces.
Yeah. And black swan events within Australia. You just don't know what's going to happen.
Well, price of petrol, for example, Jack. That is something that is beyond the control of Australian governments to a very large degree, unless they do what Scott Morrison and Josh Frydenberg did, and killed off a bit of excise. But you're losing billions of dollars in Commonwealth coffers, and for no good reason. But yeah, that's one thing that can just blow out, and that can be affected by conflict in Ukraine. It can be affected by just simply global supply routes, which are still very fragile. There's a bit of talk about what's being released. There'll be some support for low-income earners. There'll be support for housing buyers. There will be there's likely to be a tax on superannuation contributions of $3 million or more. I can't see that being a political problem, Jack.
No, I don't think so. One of the things he is going to promise, I believe, is that he's going to take the axe to the costs of the NDIS.
Yeah, that is, as we've discussed on this program a number of times, something that needs to be reviewed and
but it won't be an easy
reformed.
job.
It's certainly not going to be an easy job, and that will fall to Bill Shorten, presumably. quick one, Jack, and it's probably a little bit premature as he's delivering his second budget. Is it his second or third? I think it might be third. But a little premature because he hasn't delivered it yet. Is Jim Chalmers the government's best performer?
He delivers a message better than most, I would say.
Yeah,
just while we're on Bill Shorten, do you reckon being given carriage of the NDIS is like a British minister being given Northern Ireland?
Oh no! Look, that's always your Labor when your Labor minister, your senior Labor figure in the Parliament. The job there that no one wants is industrial relations, Jack.
Yeah, probably. At any rate, no, I think Jim Chalmers is very good at sticking a message. Whether he's got the policy directions right, I don't know.
We'll only find out.
We'll have to wait and find out. But he certainly can get up and stay on message and deliver a message. And they haven't got an excess of people who can do that at the moment.
Do you remember not so long back, Jack, debt and deficit? Debt and deficit used to fall out of the mouths of every politician, particularly on the right. Nowadays, it doesn't get a mention.
No.
Barely gets a mention. Well, we were going to have sovereign risk during the Rudd-Gillard years. Sovereign risk. You remember any of that rubbish? It was complete failure to comprehend what sovereign risk actually meant. But we were going to have sovereign risk because of debt and deficit going through and it's all nonsense. It's all pretty much a nonsense. When you've got a $1 trillion economy, $1.3 trillion economy, and the assets and liabilities of the nation of Australia, the Commonwealth of Australia, having a little bit of debt's not such a bad thing.
Well, the relevant thing to look at is how do we compare with sort of comparable mid-sized countries around the world, and we're pretty well set.
Yeah, we'll get to one of those comparable nations fairly soon, Jack. But in the meantime, Greg Craven has taken a swipe at journalists, and particularly what I might call celebrity journalism. What he says is self-regarding journalism.
Yes, he did.
Never met an op-ed writer who doesn't have a fairly healthy self-regard themselves.
Well, I think you needed to do the job. It's like I used to say about surgeons and barristers. You wouldn't want to be stuck in a train compartment with them all the way to Perth, but you don't want them standing up for you or in court or standing over you with a scalpel when they're racked by angst and self-doubt. You want them to know that they are the best.
Exactly right. Yeah, good point. So he's had a bit of a swipe here. He goes on to say, well, he's talking about how journalists, celebrity journalists or self-regarding journalists, develop a following and then manipulate that following so they can crank out other things, books.
He did. He says, not only can you get other well-paid media gigs like your own quiz show or having your backyard featured in neglected gardens, but you can write endless poorly researched books on meaningless topics that nevertheless will be purchased by your carefully groomed followers. I have no idea who he's talking about there.
Well, he's obviously having a crack at the ABC because he goes on to say the ABC is a repeat offender. It sometimes seems that no one is interviewed on our public broadcast except some employee or accredited friend speaking. He's being funny here. So we are dealing with a fair amount of exaggeration. Some employee or accredited friend spruiking their own book on the climate crisis, some unfortunate conservative politician, or the zen of green vegetables. It's not always the case. I don't know. Listeners, if you haven't heard Richard Feidler's interview with Nick Cave, I think that was beamed yesterday as we record this. It was on Conversations. By gee, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing. Where they actually discuss the business of grief. And Nick Cave said there is a deficit of words in the English language to express grief. So I'm not sure that he's I'm not sure that I'm intelligent, but I think Greg makes a really good point about celebrity journalism. We've seen a few come a cropper in the last 12 months or so. I think certainly in political journalism, when people start thinking they're players, that they can affect how the game is played in politics, that's when they should hang the boots up.
Absolutely.
When they think they're actually in the business of decision making.
Yeah, whether they're Alan Jones or Peter Fitzsimons.
Yeah, correct way. All right. Latrobe University, Jack.
I sent you this from Twitter. Did you have a look at the photo? Because you're a Latrobe graduate yourself, of course.
I'm not a graduate. God, don't put me in that basket. I was there a long time, but I didn't graduate.
You managed to avoid finishing, did you?
Oh, gee, I was a good pinball player at the end of it, and pool. Yeah. I'll still kick anyone's ass at a game of pool.
Yeah. But I love the photo. This chap's heading off to the Latrobe Gaza encampment, and he had a little pup tent and a sleeping mat and all that sort of stuff. But tucked in behind was the banjo.
Bit of
and
bluegrass.
I thought, well, that's what the Gaza encampment needs, is some prick there banging away at a banjo.
Well, meanwhile, at Monash University, Jack, it was always the hot spot for activism. Monash, I think it's calmed down over the years, but there were clashes there with the Socialist Alternative group and the university's Arab Society and Islamic Society.
They're not a natural mix, it's fair to say.
No, they what would we call the socialist alternative? What might Islamic students refer to the socialist alternative as? I mean, we would just say they were somewhat misguided human beings, but they would look at them as being corrupt morally, etc.
Yeah, they're always known as the trots to everybody else on the campus.
Well, they've decided to hold a rally without actually engaging with the Arab Society and Islamic Society at all, or it seems not. Yeah. It seems not to be the case, and the Socialist Alternative has just decided they're going to have a bit of a rally, have a bit of a camp, bring out the banjos, all that sort of stuff, and they actually the Muslim and Islamic societies at Monash University don't seem to know very much about it.
No.
Yeah. All right.
The interesting though that as usual when the Trots get involved, their first battle is not normally with the Arab and Islamic students. It's with the Labor Party, and they've come out swinging and said the Labor people are anti-protest because of the impact on their career trajectories. We believe it's a shame that for personal advancement they have chosen to stand on the wrong side of history. This is a common argument that they put against the Labor students, which is that all the work that you are doing in the Labor students groups is directed towards giving you a career trajectory as a union officer, a ministerial advisor, and onto politics yourself. So this always causes trouble, and there's backwards and forwards. And of course, the Labor Party.
They're just bourgeois class traders. That's what the Socialist Alternative would assume of the young Labor people, Jack.
Yeah, that might be true, except that the Socialist Alternative people, the Trots people, tend to be Trustafarians.
Well, there you go. Now, more serious matters here, Jack. Made in Australia. Everyone loves that idea. There's an entire economic push behind it. And now, of course, we have the future made in Australia. What will we call it? It's not a policy. It's an agenda, I think. And this comes in the wake of a number of announcements where government will offer loans, low-cost loans, and a bit of support to companies, private companies that are developing essentially around the green economy. And some people think this is protectionism. I sort of do myself, actually. If a business can't really survive without government subsidies, then if a business needs government subsidies to survive, then that's probably not a great idea. And then you've got a lot of taxpayers' money being invested in the production of goods, let's say solar photovoltaic cells, for example. and no one that I would consider sensible would be able to persuade me that we are able to build photovoltaic cells to a better quality and for a better price than is the case in China and elsewhere.
No, I think that's a fool's gold, that idea.
Yeah, well, Chalmers, Labor's best performer. We sort of agreed on that. Chalmers has identified 5 criteria for support under Future Made in Australia. That's a terrible sentence. Who wrote this, Jack? Who wrote this rubbish? Criterion is the plural there. First, can the industry be competitive and more productive? Second, does it contribute to net zero? Third, can it build the capabilities of our people, and that's a quote, and regions? Fourth, will it improve our national security and resilience? And fifth, does it recognise the key role of the private sector and deliver value for money? A lot of motherhood stuff there, isn't there, Jack?
Yeah, the real problem with all of that, it all sounds terrific, is who gets to decide whether those things are true or not.
Yeah, but that's the tick the box list, and I think you could pull out pretty much any medium to large size company, even startups, and say, well, yes, you do all of those things.
Yeah, and someone who's used to dealing with government will be able to write a white paper for that company that suggests that it does fulfil all of those things, whether it does or not.
Mm. Well, yes.
This is going to be excellent for the lobbying business.
Yeah, I dare say that will be a great little money spinner for those who work in that vexed industry, Jack. Of course,
some very good people amongst them.
Well, the main thing is, and when you talk about a future made in Australia, I mean, you've got the Japanese, the South Koreans, and the Americans to the extent of. I remember someone coming into the comments and a piece I wrote about it. Actually, I was critical of Future Made in Australia, the Future Made in Australia agenda. And he said, "Oh, look," he said, 500 million is not a lot of money. No, mate, 500 billion is going through the US economy now, essentially picking winners, concentrating on green and renewable energies, green economy stuff.
Well, but they hope it's picking winners.
Well, their economy's going okay, Jack.
Yeah. Well, whether it's picking winners or not may or may not be the case.
Yeah, but their economy's going pretty well. I mean, they have got their inflation within that comfort zone, and they've got huge employment growth, and they've got pretty reasonable economic growth compared to Australia, for example. It's fairly lackluster. So they're going okay. My point is that if these countries do this, we really can't be left behind. Otherwise, you do sort of suffer sort of national security. Now, we've done this before, of course. We had a very good photovoltaic cell industry in this country, and it was subsidised by the Rudd government. And then I think in Wayne Swan's second budget, they killed it, and they basically just killed the industry overnight. And that's the problem I've got with this sort of a Future Made in Australia agenda stuff, that, you can have a change of government or just a change of heart or a change of economic circumstances. And these businesses that have, that have been picked as winners all of a sudden have the floor drop, the floor drop on them, so, there's no governments are not consistent about these things. That's my point.
My problem is it turns business people into lobbyists, that the success of your business in the end becomes too dependent upon whether you can persuade the government to do what you want it to do. I don't think that's good for government or for business.
All right, City of Yarra. That's Fitzroy, Collingwood. Don't think it's Carlton, is it, Jack? That must be another council.
No, they're in Melbourne, I think.
Right, so the city, that's right, City of Yarra. So it all goes all the way to Alphington, I think, and out the back to Yarra Bend. But all streets in Fitzroy and Collingwood, excluding major roads, will have new speed limits of 30 kilometres an hour. I mean, you're flat out driving a car at under 30 kilometres an hour, and
yeah, I think it's down. I think it's down as low as 20 kilometres an hour in some parts of London, as they're pressing on with their ULEZ, which is their ultra low emission standards, etc.
Well, there's so much building going on, major project development going on in Victoria, in Melbourne, and inner city Melbourne in particular. You'd be flat out going 30 kilometres per hour. If you got up to 30 kilometres per hour, you'd be having a good day.
Well, there'd be someone there with a stop go sign stopping it. Yeah?
I drove in from coming into the city, and I had to go to East Melbourne, and the best way to do that was to cut through Reservoir Preston and come in through Fitzroy that way, and it was horrendous. That was about a year ago. But so yeah, if you're doing 30 kilometres per hour there, you'd be pretty happy.
Yeah. This is a local council directed experiment. This wasn't something done by the state government. Indeed, the police inspectors.
Police aren't all that happy about it.
No, they're calling it ridiculous. But I always kind of enjoy it when local governments say, "Look, fixing potholes and collecting the rubbish is a bit dull."
Yeah, we want to make big changes.
We want to have our play on the world stage. So, we're going to tell them what to do in Gaza and Ukraine.
Always been doing it, Jack, but well before the amalgamations, of course. Collingwood, I'm going to say Collingwood, and I'm going to say Richmond councils, they were nuclear free. Not allowed to drop a nuclear bomb on them.
Indeed.
It never happened, so it did work.
And our very good friend, who was the mayor of Northcote, also declared that Northcote was a nuclear-free zone. And again, no nuclear weapons,
no nuclear bombs detonated anywhere in inner city Melbourne. So it obviously worked, Jack. I think you might be underestimating the power of these things. But yes, 30 kilometres an hour requires a police response, Jack. And that means that police have either got to set up their speed cameras, mobile speed cameras. I don't think in Victoria you have to advertise it. In New South Wales you do. And you've got to police the whole thing. And it falls into state government revenue. You've got to chase people up, get them to pay their fines and all this sort of stuff. It's not just a local government experience.
I could just imagine. So I presume Brunswick Street's still normal speed limit, but you turn around into Kerr Street, and you'd have to set up a mobile speed limit there. I suppose you could duck into the Marquita lawn and spend the afternoon with Phil Malin in there, but while the camera did its work. But
30 kilometres an hour is pretty slow. Look, there are a lot of side streets in Fitzroy and Collingwood are that bloody narrow anyway. You wouldn't dare go over 30 kilometres per hour.
The only people who
most people are looking for a park anyway, so they're not really screaming around the place.
The only people who'd be doing anything more than 30 kilometres an hour in those little side streets would be on a push bike.
Yeah, going very, very fast. A lot faster than that, and I presume they're not in it. They're not included in the attempt to catch the speeders. Immigration detainees, Jack. Look, there was a bit of a I don't know how much cut through there was on this, but one of these offending fellows who was released by prior to the High Court's decision and has gone on to commit offences was released during Peter Dutton's time as Home Affairs Minister, Jack.
He was.
So it tells us that these things are very, very difficult. I mean, Peter Dutton and the Liberals have tried to politicise this up the wazoo, and to some success, you'd have to say. But if you wanted to have a review, if you ever want to cause a few problems, have a Royal Commission into the Home Affairs Department over the last 10 years and see what comes out. Just shake that tree and see what falls on their deck.
There's plenty of blame to go around. And these are, and as we've been saying consistently, these are not easy problems to fix. The High Court's made a decision in the case that's known as ASF 17, and has decided that holding a detainee, holding an applicant in detention remains a non-punitive purpose that is reasonably capable of being achieved if and for so long as removal could be achieved in the reasonably foreseeable future were the detainee to decide to cooperate in undertaking the processes to facilitate that removal. Can I just give you an example of what this problem is trying to deal with? You might get an applicant who has exhausted their opportunities to stay in Australia by getting some kind of protection or other visa. Right? That is, they've been through the ministerial level, they've been through the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the courts. Everyone said, no, you're not a refugee. Then the applicant says, well, I don't care. I'm not going to go anyway because I haven't got a passport, because I threw my passport in the drink on the boat from Indonesia to Australia. And because I haven't got a passport, there's nowhere you can send me. And I'm not going to apply for a new passport. So what do you do with that? And this is the sort of situation, that's exactly the kind of situation that this case is trying to address.
What's the limb principle, Jack?
The limb principle is that it shouldn't be punitive, that it should be only for immigration purposes, not to punish somebody.
So this is from the High Court judgment. The short point is that, comfortably with the limb principle, continuing detention for a non-punitive purpose that is occurring because of a voluntary decision of the detainee cannot be characterised as penal or punitive. ASF 17 could be removed to Iran if he cooperated in the process of obtaining the requisite travel documents from Iranian authorities. He has decided not to cooperate. He has the capacity to change his mind. He chooses not to do so. So what does that mean in practical terms, Jack?
He will be detained.
Okay. All right.
And like I say, the two choices are you either detain him or you let him decide that he's going to stay in the country despite having failed to persuade any of the relevant authorities of the truthfulness of his claims.
So this gives the government some wiggle room now. They've talked about their own responses to this, and they have a committee of people to assess the risk or otherwise of former detainees. This provides Labor with some comfort, doesn't it? I mean, we talked about Giles and how awful he is at his job, but this might just give them a little bit of comfort.
It gives them a little bit of time to fix a problem.
Okay.
To come up with a legislative and administrative process that will stand up.
All right. Well, last week, Jack, and we did touch on this in the show, the government released the future gas strategy. In fact, they had released it a couple of days after we recorded, but it was coming, and a lot of leaks to the media and so forth. And it would seem that several Labor MPs are not happy about it.
Yeah, no, 6 of them have expressed that, told the government they should be speeding up the transition away from fossil fuels, not prolonging their life.
Well, we talked about gas, Jack, as being a transition energy form, but some of these Labor MPs don't see it that way. They still see it as fossil fuel burning, high carbon emitting, all that sort of stuff. Can we just sort of clear up very quickly what the future gas strategy is? And I went on a bit of a rant last week about John Howard and how he had placed Australia in pretty awkward circumstances, you know, where let's say, for example, that the Japanese are paying about a third for what we're paying for gas, which is a ridiculous thing. But the future gas strategy is, it says, Australia is committed to supporting global emissions reductions to reduce the impacts of climate change and will reach net zero emissions by 2050. Gas must remain affordable for Australian users throughout the transition to net zero. New sources of gas supply are needed, so that means more gas mines and refineries.
More gas exploration as well.
Exploration, etc. New sources of gas supply needed to meet demand during the economy-wide transition. Reliable gas supply will gradually and inevitably support a shift towards higher value and non-substitutable gas users. And I'm not sure what that means. You might be able to help me out there, Jack.
I'm not
a shift
entirely
towards
sure what it means
higher
either.
value and non-substitutable. Are we talking about green hydrogen there? I'm not quite sure what's meant there. Households will continue to have a choice over how their energy needs are met. Gas and electricity markets must adapt to remain fit for purpose throughout the energy transformation. Australia is and will remain a reliable trading partner for energy, including LNG, liquefied natural gas, and low emissions gases.
The message that's hidden away there is that we have committed to these international contracts to supply gas there, so we need to produce more gas for domestic consumption as well as the gas that's going overseas.
Yeah, as I said before, we had our energy, future energy resources basically sold down the river by the Howard government. So it's 6 backbenchers, Jack. I see Assistant Minister Jed Carney has said that no more public money should be spent on new gas or coal projects. I'm not quite sure that that's the issue, is it? I don't know that there would be any money, any public money, Commonwealth money going into gas exploration.
No. All they would, the government's role in that would be to provide some assurance that that they wouldn't put a ban on it, so it couldn't be sold into the market.
Yes, that's quite different from weighing in.
Yes,
I mean this is the Barnaby Joyce wet dream, wasn't it? That the Commonwealth would build a coal-fire electricity generator. Because they couldn't get any private funds together to do it. Yeah, again we get into that made in Australia or that sort of made in Australia thing. This is no role for government at all for to be weighing in on energy sources. But having said that, we do have this ridiculous situation where our gas is 3 times more expensive, extracted from our country, and 3 times more expensive than it is to its export markets.
Mm. Well, the local market has to pay 3 times the price of the long-term guaranteed overseas contract.
Ridiculous stuff. And every time John Howard steps forward, he should be reminded of that. Adam Bandt, Jack, has said, look, if you don't like it, to these 6 MPs and anyone else is listening, come and join us.
Yes,
said, if you don't, you're not doing everything you can. You're grandstanding.
He would be thinking they can pick up some further seats.
Oh, I would think so in the city environment. Yes. Meanwhile, we go overseas now. United Kingdom, Jack. The best tactic for Rishi Sunak from the Telegraph in the UK.
It's from one of Mullah Nasruddin's fables. The great polymath is caught in the act and sentenced to death. Pleading for forgiveness from the king, he promises that given a year, he can teach the king's horse to sing. Oh, yeah. The idea amuses the king, and he agrees to the bargain. On his way to be taken to the stables, Nasruddin meets his former cellmate, who immediately says what a fool he is. You know full well that you cannot teach that horse to sing, says the cellmate, to which Nasruddin replies, but a year is a long time, and anything can happen in a year. The horse might die, the king might die, I might die, and who knows, the horse might sing.
Yeah, but we are talking a lot of long shots there, aren't we, Jack? We are talking long shots.
That's precisely where Rishi Sunak is at the moment, I think. He's got to hope that the horse can sing.
Mate of mine in London, and there is this strong sense that things are really falling apart in the UK at the moment, and really no one can wait for a change of government. But there's not a great deal of confidence about that new government.
Not that they have any fondness for the Labor Party at all. Even Neil Kinnock, the former Labor leader was saying that, making that very point, that people don't have much confidence in the incoming, what will be the incoming Labor government, and in fact he was cautioning that they might not quite get there, as he didn't in 1992. But I think they're
good Lord.
I think they're further gone than that.
I wouldn't mind being his bookie. Look, the problem with the Tories is that they've had two brutal ideological feuds in the Johnson period and his predecessor. They are really just dead men walking. But the other problem you've got in the UK is they've literally sold the farm, and they're talking about renationalising the railways, talking about renationalising Thames Water, because privatising has just been a complete and utter failure there. Particularly, you can fly from London to Manchester cheaper than you can catch a train.
Yes,
it's just bizarre. So there's been no investment through the privatisation of railways. There's been no investment on rail, or the infrastructure, I should say, around rail. So that's all sort of falling apart. It's the same thing with Thames Water. That's all sort of falling apart. And so when you have to do these sort of Band-Aid type things to keep your trains running, you're going to have to charge people to do that. It comes in the increase in fares. So there is a real sense of despair around the UK at the moment, as far as I can gather.
Yeah, they didn't handle through the Thatcher years and the Blair years. They didn't handle privatisation as well as we did in Australia. That's certainly true. People can sometimes complain about it in Australia, and they complain about Telstra, and I just think, well, they can't remember Telecom, if that's the case. Telecom would be much worse.
See, basically, when you move from a public or nationalised company to a privatised one, what happens is you will almost certainly have infrastructure degenerate, and that's around, let's say, and we've just been talking about the railroads, or in terms of British Telecom, in communications infrastructure.
Yeah, don't forget that during the Thatcher years, the government actually ran a furniture removal company and a travel agency.
Yeah, and so you can actually appeal to people about privatisation, whether it's the UK or here, and say, look, some of these things just, there's no role for government. Let's say, as an example, just off the top of my head, retail energy companies, right? Why should they be owned by government? And most of them aren't anymore. But you would need to make a pretty bloody good argument to me to say, why should we be privatising prisons? I mean, there are some things the state needs to take responsibility for.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Moving over to the States, Jack, a lot of noise about university protests around Gaza. And I think we've got a very sensible remark here from the University of Chicago President Paul Elevisatos. Elevisatos? Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Paul?
He said it's a principle animated by the idea that the authority can't establish truth for an entire institution dedicated to truth-seeking. Rather, it is the imperative of individuals to seek truth without being limited by authority. Institutional neutrality vests freedom of inquiry and speech directly in faculty and students where it belongs. That is, the university can't tell you what you should think. You should think what you want to think. Yeah,
it's a really smart thing. The protesters were determined that the university, this is going on with a quote from the man, the president of the University of Chicago. The protesters were determined that the university should take sides in the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Faculty members and students are more than free to engage in advocacy on one side or the other. But if the university did so as an institution, it would no longer be much of a university. Pretty wise words from Paul Elevisatos.
And apart from that, make sure that people can move around the university and go to classes while the demonstrations are taking place.
Well, yeah, that's probably a secondary thing, but yeah, that's right. Your university cannot take a position on something as vexed as what's going on in Gaza at the moment. Meanwhile, Jack, the potential VP candidate with Donald Trump, she's the South Dakota governor, Kristi Noem.
Hasn't this been fun?
Oh, fantastic stuff. She was basically put out of her misery yesterday. She has a book out, Jack, where in that book, and our listeners will probably be aware of this, she sort of proudly boasted of shooting her dog, and you could just see her career just collapse there and then. And I saw her do some absolute train wreck interviews because she's touting.
They were getting better and better as the week went on.
She'd get really antsy with the interviewers, whether it was CNN or Fox News or whoever it was. They were all going, "What in the hell have you disclosed this sort of information for?" And now it's all over.
She tried to say that it was done for the protection of her children in the end, because it was a bit of a yappy, nippy dog. And look, if it's not a dog that's suitable for kids, you find another home for it. You don't shoot it.
Yeah. There's a lot of dog lovers in the United States. They're not gonna take kindly to this. Political aides soothed the South Dakota governor by informing her that her political career had simply gone to live at a farm upstate. A farm a long way away that you can't actually visit. Shh, it's okay, said her chief of staff, Eric Lawrence. Your political career has gone to live with Mr. Stonyhill, where there's plenty of land to campaign in. It'll be happier there.
This is from Babylon B, the satirical side.
Yeah, it's not quite what happened, but it is, and it isn't. I mean, there's just no way out from that. She must have. I mean, she's a South Dakotan, so it's perhaps a different constituency than you might find in New York, Florida, or California, but. Still, people were just scratching themselves. Why you should? And she was proud. She was proud of it. I shot a dog.
Yeah. Then there was the kerfuffle over in the book. She suggests that she'd met Kim Jong Un,
the late. Oh, not was it Jong Un or his dad?
The current one, I think, the current leader of North Korea. And of course, this wasn't actually true.
No. A little bit of an embellishment there.
But she had been to the DMZ on a tour, I think so.
Yeah, and Kim Jong-un doesn't normally pop down there.
No.
So it's funny. It's got a little bit of, what was the name? McCann's VP, Jack, from Alaska.
Sarah Palin.
Sarah Palin, who could look out the kitchen window and see Russia.
Yeah.
There's a wonderful story actually a rather wonderful book about McCain's candidacy. And it speaks of that moment where McCain and his advisors sat around and figured out who they were going to have as their vice president. And they finally fell on Sarah Palin for tactical reasons. She was a woman, not unattractive. And so this advisor, they'd finally settled that it was going to be Sarah Palin. So he had to go and talk to Sarah Palin and say, would you like to be our vice presidential candidate? And then he said one of the funniest lines you'll ever read in a political biography, who said, and then I had to explain World War II to her. Anyway, meanwhile, back to the universities, Jack. There's a lot of trouble there.
Just before we leave that, her advisor told her, explained to the public that in cases like Governor Noem, the political career was frankly already dead. We were just putting it out of its misery.
It was euthanized, Jack. All right, but back to the universities, though. Hunger strike at Princeton.
Yeah, they did. A couple of wonderful interviews you'll find on social media with the young people who were going on the hunger strike. They were. This made a bit of a change from Colombia, where they were demanding to be fed. That they thought that
That's right. They wanted pizzas delivered.
They wanted food delivered, and given where they are, is about 40 metres from a great long food strip on Broadway. There, that seemed to be absurd. But at Princeton, they've gone on a hunger strike, and out of solidarity, the faculty are joining them on rotating 24-hour hunger strikes.
Well,
which I think is otherwise called skipping lunch, isn't it?
I'm not going to make too big a joke of this. In fact, I'm not going to make a joke at all. But you want to starve yourself? Bobby Sands took him 66 days to die of starvation. I am going to go nuts and say, well, I don't think that's going to happen. There was a level of intention there from Bobby Sands. He couldn't even get a catheter in, or couldn't even get a UV drip into his arm. An IV drip, I should say. Oh, well, look, and with that sort of grim news, that's kind of what you're looking at if you want to starve yourself. The rest of it is basically just show. Abortion, Jack.
No one seriously believes they're going to starve themselves to death, do they?
I don't think anyone does. Most of all, the people engaged in the hunger strike.
No,
it is a look at me sort of thing to do, isn't it? I mean, it's a sort of creeping narcissism whenever you sort of do that, particularly if you don't have the intent. As Bobby Sands is a former MP of the United Kingdom, Jack.
This is the preschooler who says I'm leaving home, or I'm going to hold my breath until I turn blue, unless you give me what I want.
Leaving.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Now, look, we've been having a bit of a look. I think RFK Jr. is worth a segment, Jack. I reckon we've got to focus on him every week until the presidential elections, because he is on fire at the moment. When he was asked about abortion, he played the Libertarian card. He said, "I believe we should leave it to the woman. We shouldn't have the government involved." Find it hard to disagree with him. Who's Steele? Who was interviewing him?
I can't remember the name of the interviewer. Yeah.
Even if it's full term, RFK replied, even if it's full term. I kind of have to agree with him on many things, that it's no role for the government. And the Democrats are playing merry with the idea that in some states they're going to places like Alabama, they will be monitoring the pregnancy. The state will be monitoring the pregnancies of women who are expecting, and it's just nuts. I mean, the right wing, the right wing in America, they're libertarian to a point, and then they are all in on an authoritarian government anytime. But even worse than that, Jack, RFK, he might have actually made a little bit of sense in the abortion debate. And that either could be because of, or notwithstanding, according to the New York Times, a brain worm was discovered in his cranium that had been gnawing on his brain for a fairly. It's gone now. He's okay. He's recovered. But that's something that he said he had a brain worm, Jack. Have you ever had a brain worm?
I read the story and wondered if it was a repeat of the interview he gave in a restaurant in New York where he was overserved, shall we say.
That's right. He was heavily refreshed.
Yes.
He really is very nutty. He's skiing around on the slopes trying to look like he's 25, when he's really he's basically less than a decade older than Trump and not much older than Biden. And so he's trying to look like this
not much older than me.
No. And he just comes up with bizarre things. One thing we discovered last week, listeners, if you didn't catch the program, was that some of his supporters are scared of microwave ovens. And this came when they've had various fundraisers where people would bring a plate, Jack, and they had to bring the whole casserole. They had to bring the whole casserole dish.
In America,
reheat it.
In America, they're called potluck suppers.
Potlucks, yeah. And but they couldn't warm him up because some of his staffers are scared of microwave ovens. Dear, oh dear. Look, I honestly think we'll be looking at RFK Jr., brain worm or not. He's got over it now. The brain worm's gone. I don't know where it went. Did it go into his ear and became an earworm? You would have had an earworm over the time. You just can't get that tune out of your head, Jack. But this was a brainworm, and it ate a portion of his brain, which is sort of, as unlikely as it is, it does explain a great deal about Junior. And Trump's taken to calling him Junior now too, which I kind of love. Argentina, Jack, we're going to have a detailed look at how that's going. I mean, we're talking about Australian economic conditions. In Argentina, they've had hyperinflation. I think the worst hyperinflation their country has seen for the last 30 years. They had an election last year where they elected Javier Milei, and who was sort of, I guess you'd call him a maverick politician, Jack, a former right-wing economist. And he's come into power, and it would seem there are some, I wouldn't even call them green shoots, but at least on monthly figures and quarterly figures, their inflation rates are declining. We're awaiting their April results.
Yeah, the cumulative figure for the year is 287%. So it's not good, but the last figure has put them back to where they were pre-election, and I think a lot of people thought that the economy would sort of collapse. The whole the country would collapse in effect, and that hasn't happened. And it's sort of heading in the right direction. I think it's too early to call whether what he's doing is a success.
I think so.
But it certainly hasn't been a failure.
Let's look at some of the other economic indicators, Jack, when you're talking about, and the problem with dealing with inflation, yes, you've got to slay the dragon, as Paul Keating said. You must slay the dragon. But the problem with that is if you really cut back, particularly, governments can only cut back in public expenditure, and that can have a real impact on GDP growth. So their GDP growth annualised as of April this year is negative 2.8. That's You're getting into depression territory if that continues. The current account's not too bad. You mentioned the inflation. Inflation rate as determined at average consumer prices is at 249.8. Again, that's an annualised from April to April 2023 to April 2024. Unemployment rate high at 8%. Probably could be worse, I suppose. You wouldn't want it to be. I'm not willing it to be, but that figure's not too bad. And that's the problem they've got. If you slay the dragon and you basically drive the economy into a deep and enduring recession as a result, that's the problem you've got. So it's not just a case of stopping government expenditure, because government expenditure is particularly good at keeping growth rolling along, but it does have inflationary impacts. So it's a very difficult thing to do. I'm not opposed to Javier Milei as a libertarian, but you probably got to a point, so much political failure, not necessarily around their democratic institutions, but they've had, of course, military juntas running the country for long periods of time as well, a lot of social dislocation. And it probably needed something of a shock like Milei has brought on. It must be pretty hard living there. I was looking at some footage of Argentinians wandering around a market, looking at fruit and veg, and basically when you've got inflation rate running about 250%, that means the prices are going to change in between the time you pick your fruit and choose and reach for your wallet.
We just got a note from a listener called Paul. He says, whatever you do, Javier, don't say this is the recession we had to have.
Well, look, I mean, the Argentinians have been through so much economic strife. Hyperinflation, it is the home of hyperinflation, by the way, and negative economic growth.
They have
they're almost beyond pain or beyond shock at least.
They've defaulted on their debt 9 times. They're an example. You know what? Australia's federation, Argentina, was probably slightly richer than Australia.
Yeah, that's right. That was
120 years of bad government has landed them in this situation.
Well, they might have had 5 or 6, or maybe even 10 decent years of decent government. But if you've had 110 bad ones, then things are not looking all that flash. We'll keep an eye on it because it is very interesting. But these things are very, very difficult to resolve. They had to sit down with the IMF. I think that was in January or February, Jack, and get some debt forgiveness. Shall we say? Is that the right term?
Or it's been put on hold in any event. No one's
that's
moved against them.
And then there's been a huge constraint around government spending, and he's devalued the peso by 50% against the US dollar. Very important. He's hooked it up. He's hooked it up to the greenback. Yeah, and the other thing is that if you constrain government spending, we were just talking about privatisation. He's got a pretty big privatisation program up his sleeve as well. And we're talking about the limits of all of that. And libertarians, of course, don't believe that government should be involved pretty much in anything. So we'll see. Certainly, it's way too early. I think he really only came to power November, December last year, and we'll see how he gets on. But he seems to have at least had his policy so far have at least had an impact on inflation. But economic growth remains desultory and negative. So one to watch there. I suspect.
His comment was sensible. He said there is no magic. Real life needs time, and I think that's
not
right.
What he said during the campaign, Jack. He had the chainsaw, all the magic at his disposal. It's funny how people change when they come into government, Jack. When they've got to actually do things. They
come into government, discover there's no money.
Well, he kind of knew that, and he had the chainsaw, and it was all going to be beautiful. But hang on, these things are actually hard. We'll see how it goes for the people of Argentina. I mean, we hope that there is some respite. But anyway, we'll move on. Israel and Gaza, Jack. What's happening and what should happen? Rafah seems to be almost terminally delayed, doesn't it? The boots on the ground situation there. And, of course, Netanyahu sort of got boxed into a corner a little bit by the Biden administration. And then they Netanyahu opted to sort of coalesce with some fairly extreme politicians and political parties.
Yeah, I think it's probably going to go ahead. Perhaps more slowly than they anticipated, but we'll go ahead.
Well, they seem
I don't think
they seem intent on doing it.
I don't think that there is anything like a significant push within Israel not to do it.
Well, I did see, Jack, and we did discuss this off-air last week, 54% in a poll and published in the Times of Israel, 54% of respondents said that they would prefer continued negotiations for the release of hostages. It's 54% of Israelis. Continued negotiations for the release of hostages. I think there are some 120 still, and it may be more, 150 I think might be the better term, 150 still in captivity, as far as we know.
Or more accurately, unaccounted for.
Unaccounted for is the right term.
There is no. I think it would be fanciful to suggest that all of these people are still alive.
anyway, 54% of Israelis believed, according to this poll and published in the Times of Israel, that there should be negotiation for the release of those hostages and not boots on the ground in Rafah. So that was pretty significant. It's a fairly strong majority. General Mark Milley, the former Joint Chiefs. I think he might still be. Is he Joint Chief of Staff?
I think he's finished his term.
And he said, if you take 1,200 Israelis massacred on October 7th and apply it to the United States, that'd be 50 to 100,000 people dead in the morning. Can you imagine what we would do? It is a rather specious point, but I think the world has far too quickly forgotten just how this all started, Jack.
They have.
And it was appalling. And there is, and you and I have argued about this on air and off air, I think Rafah's a line that the West won't tolerate, a line that if crossed the West won't tolerate. However, I do see your point that Hamas needs to be eradicated out of Gaza. Now, how you do that doesn't necessarily mean that you've got to have boots on the ground and, God forbid, another 30,000 casualties, another 10,000 dead children. I fully accept your view that Hamas needs to be eradicated from Gaza.
Well, all the talk of a two-state solution and UN resolutions to that effect, none of that can work while Hamas is still. If there were an election tomorrow in the West Bank and in Gaza, Hamas would be the new Palestinian Authority.
But that's kind of a bit of a nonsense anyway. I mean, if there was an election here tomorrow, all sorts of things can happen. But in a place that is war torn, you're going to get some issues that you're not going to get a proper exercise of the ballot box. I don't think.
But there hasn't been an election in either place for 15 years because Hamas is the most popular political.
Well, when
party.
there was, Hamas got, I think, about 44% of the vote, and Fatah about 41%.
Yeah,
and people also forget this: when they did win, when Hamas did win, with the exception of some of the senior leadership of Fatah, they dragged them out of their houses, just killed them, Jack. A bit of a sign that all was not well then.
All of the Palestinian Authority people in Gaza were killed. Yes,
were dragged out of their homes and executed.
Summarily. And if the Israelis left Gaza tomorrow, all of the people who Hamas suspect of having assisted the Israelis or being neutral would meet the same fate.
Look, I understand, and Hamas needs to go, but I just think, I don't know that the region or the world can handle another 30,000 casualties in Gaza, Jack. Another 10,000 children, and that's just a off the top of my head type figure. But I don't think the region or the world can handle it.
Yeah, well, you and I discussed this, and my firm view is that the worst possible result for the Palestinian people, is to leave Hamas in charge.
Mate, the worst. You and I have discussed this. The worst possible result would be troops on the ground IDF troops on the ground in Rafah. That would be the worst thing, because there are 1 million people there who have all been told to leave, and so all told to leave Gaza City and go to Rafah for refuge, and now the place is going to be set upon. So that's the worst scenario, Jack. The worst scenario is being killed, right? That's that. Nothing gets worse than that, be it by airstrike or shot by a soldier. It's an awful conflict, and the best we can hope for is a sort of a lasting, and it may not last more than a few months, ceasefire where at least some sort of negotiated settlement can be reached. That hopefully has some, prospect of enduring, peaceful.
Yeah, no, I'm afraid I can't agree with that, but there you go.
Yeah, well, look, I just don't think the world can handle another 30,000 dead Palestinians, Jack. I really don't think so. I don't think the world can handle it, and then you will see escalation. All right, moving on. Happier things, sport, which we both love, and we were talking about influential players. Sometimes they're not always the ones you expect, but. Isaac Heeney for the Swans, he's having a blinding season. He'd be leading the Brownlow at the moment. He's taken a midfield role, and he and Bontompelli, I'm trying to think of his first name because everyone calls him the Bont. Marcus Bontompelli. They're in front of everyone at the moment, and
one that stuck up for me was Jordan Boyd. The champion data people will say he's the best user of the football at Carlton, 30% better than the next one.
Yeah, well, obviously that's. I mean, he is a very good user. Beautiful, I think, bit of a left foot kick. Boy from Spotswood, Jack. Used to play for Spotswood Footy Club, and then just basically turned up. And Carlton absolutely love him. He's very hard at it, sort of defender. One thing, Carlton's win against the D's, they probably shut up shop a bit too early, but defensively they were much, much better. And look, he's a very good user, but as I said to you before, the one that's missing is probably still 4 weeks away is Adam Saad, because he's the one who's the good user coming out of that half-back line, and those guys are pretty hard to find.
It just shows you the importance of getting the football in the right hands, though. Back in the early 1990s, when I was still living in Melbourne and supporting Essendon, an Essendon mate of mine used to say that if you pick up the paper and Michael Long has touched the ball 10 times, then Essendon is going to have been competitive. If he's touched it 15 times, Essendon will have won. And that was always true. Just because he was, like these blokes, a really good user. It's really important to get the ball in the right hands.
There's been a bit of change in the way footy is played. AFL footy is played, and one of those things. It used to be about stoppage and clearance game, right? And the ability to take the ball deep into your forward line from stoppage, or indeed tie the ball up defensively around stoppage as well. Now those things still exist, and they don't get underplayed. But the big difference now is the sides with the silky foot skills, etc. They are the sides that make you pay on turnover. Every side's going to turn the ball over, and if you look at the statistics, you might find that some sides turn it over a little bit more than others, and that might have something to do with pressure and tackling. But the big shift is, can you make them pay when they do drop the ball into your teammates' arms? Are you going to be able to get away and score? And that's what Sydney have been doing this year. They're game clear at the top. They play Carlton on Friday night, and I will be there.
4 out of the last 5 premiers have been number 1 in the stats for scoring off half-back. The exception was Melbourne.
Well, you could almost just take that scoring off halfback. You could say scoring from turnovers.
Turnovers, yeah.
Because the ball does tend to bounce back. And you can see with sides that are probably developing or coming off very successful eras, you can see that, the ball will bounce back and forward from the 2 arcs. But it's the good sides who make you pay.
That'll be excellent on Friday night.
It should be a great game. Yes, I'll be watching that from the Noble stand. Very much looking forward to it. Tony Shaw says Max Gawn is by far the best captain in the AFL right now. What, Patrick Cripps? No. What about the Bombers guy? He's been terrific. I don't know. I mean, look, Max Gawn is probably the most important player in Melbourne's side. Would you say
easily,
that?
I think, yeah.
Yeah, and he is a very fine leader. Look, I think virtually every club has if you miss this guy, then you're probably not going to go as well. So at Carlton, I would say it's either Cripps or Wiedering. Sydney, I don't know. I would think would be John Blakey if he succumbed to injury or something like that, was missing a week or two. That would be one really, really important player, and of course their skipper as well, Errol Gould, very good player. Geelong, Jack, that was a bit odd, wasn't it, on the weekend?
Yeah.
2 losses, their second loss in a row, and this one at home.
And they looked like they'd lost their way completely, didn't they?
They looked like they were just going through the motions, and then they did get a bit of a fire up, and the former number 1 draft pick grabbed the footy and tried to barge his way through and got tackled and Horn Francis and put on the ground, and the umpire's whistle remained in his gob, remained in his hand, not in his gob. And I've got to ask myself, and I've been asking myself all season, is it just not holding? They're not holding the ball anymore. The only time they seem to play it is where a player's running with the footy and is tackled to a point where the ball will be disturbed from his possession, and they'll play a holding the ball, incorrect disposal free kick. But you've got blokes who are trying to barge through 2 and 3 players now, and they're not getting pinged.
No, don't seem to be, do they? It's. I think there's a time for a bit of a consistency review.
I think there is too, and the trouble with it is you've got. And I was watching the first game of the season and and watching sort of various decisions being made and go, well, that's not going to be paid in September. That's not going to be paid in September. And there should be a bit of consistency. Having said that, don't want to bag umpires too much, because AFL umpiring must be incredibly difficult. Just around the holding the ball rule alone, they've probably got to go through a checklist of about 8 things mentally in their minds before they can blow the whistle and pay the free kick. So it's probably just easier not to pay it.
Yeah, and I think also with 4 of them out there these days, I think they look at each other and are not sure. I think there's a bit of uncertainty because of the number of them.
I don't know that the umpiring's got any better with the 4 on the deck.
No, nor do I.
I think it was probably better with 2 and 3. Two might be one short for just in terms of that
keeping up.
Yeah, the defensive spoiling and grabbing and that sort of stuff. If you've got someone standing there on the boundary line watching how forwards can get and sometimes do it themselves too, but how they can be pulled back, stopped from leading, that sort of thing, blocked. But yeah, I agree. Certainly having a 4th umpire on the field has not made things any better. We'll see about that. NRL, Jack, what do you like? Who do you like so far in the NRL?
Well, I've been really surprised about the Sharkies. They've been okay.
They're going real well. Yeah, they're on top of the ladder and doing very nicely. The Panthers are in a good spot again to have a strike at it. Storm got rolled on the weekend. Again, they're thereabouts. They're like the Sydney Swans of the NRL. Jack, just if they're having a rebuilding year, they'll finish 5th.
Yeah, they're always going to be there, and if things go their way at the end, they might just win it.
Premier League, Jack. I know a few Arsenal supporters, and they are praying for a draw, any draw. Man City have got 2 games to play. Arsenal just the one. I think everyone else pretty much in contention, including Liverpool, have got 2 to play. Oh, actually, Liverpool would have played last night, so I better get that result in. I presume they had a win, but all 3 draw. Well, what does that do to the table?
With Villa, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, Aston Villa are coming. Of course, they needed a win to cement that 4th spot. Tottenham will probably almost certainly finish 5th.
Social media is full of Arsenal fans for the first time in their life barracking for Spurs because Spurs are playing Man City tomorrow night.
And will Tottenham do them a favour? And they hate each other. Yeah. So will Tottenham do them a favour? And because Man City play them on the last game of the of
I
pretty much
can
of
tell
the
you that
season. They play him at Tottenham.
I saw Ange Postecoglou said, "Well, we're a football team. We'll be trying to win. The Spurs will be trying to win."
Yeah.
The good thing is the last day of the year, all of the games must start at the same time.
Yeah, what do we call it, Jack?
Oh, no idea.
Shotgun start.
Shotgun start. Yeah, but it's a good idea. No funny buggers. Everyone's on a level playing field.
You probably couldn't do it in the AFL, for example, just because you haven't got enough grounds.
But we don't have the situation where the end of the home and away series determines a title either, though. So
yeah, that's true enough too. So the relegation battle has been determined with Luton Town, Burnley, and Sheffield United going down. Of course, Everton lost a lot of points for various disgraces. Financial disgraces as a club. They lost points as determined by the Premier League. They finished 15th. Nottingham Forest lived to fight another day. Luton Town, I should say, just got up last year, just came in and straight back down again. And the loss in terms of money is just extraordinary. It's just millions and millions of pounds that they won't have. What do we say about Ange finishing? I'd say you could pretty much put the house on the fact that Tottenham will finish fifth, regardless of whether they beat Man City or not. They'll finish fifth, and that fifth spot should be opened up for Europe next year. It hasn't been confirmed yet, but that should qualify whoever finishes fifth to play in Europe next season. And
he's still very, very popular. They've had a poor finish to the season, but he's still very, very popular.
A bit. They finished eighth last year. I needed to check that because I thought it was a fair way further down the line. But it's a very proud club, and for them to be finishing eighth or out of the running, out of European contention anyway, was a big problem. So that and let's not forget they lost when Ange took over. They lost probably the best footballer in England, who took off to play in the German comp. Yeah. So Harry Kane gone there, probably the best footballer in England. And so overall you'd say you'd give them a pass mark. Man United, they've got some scary problems. And Arsenal, Man City, they're going to be very hard to beat. They're going to be very hard to beat. And if you're an Arsenal supporter, all you can do is wish for the best, but it may not pan out that way. All right. Well, what else have we got? Oh, cricket, Jack. Gee whiz. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but Jimmy Anderson retired, 700 wickets. England's greatest bowler. He'd be up there, wouldn't he?
Oh, he's up
on
there.
The podium.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say he actually released his retirement on Facebook. He said, "Hi everyone, just a note to say that the first test of the summer at Lords v the West Indies will be my last." It's against the West Indies. He didn't say that. "It's been an incredible 20 years representing my country, playing the game I've loved since I was a kid. I'm going to miss walking out for England so much, but I know the time is right to step aside." It goes on. Do you think he was tapped? He's 42, mate, and he was still taking wickets.
He was still, even on the tour of India on unfriendly pitches, he was still their best seamer.
Look, he is. I mean, I think there's something to be said for a guy, if your body hangs in there. It's quite remarkable for a 42-year-old, let's say, fast medium bowler to be still around and still taking wickets. But yeah, it's been an astonishing career, and well done to him. But I got the feeling that England was pretty keen for the retirement to be announced if they didn't actually give him a little tap on the shoulder.
Well, that's in part because they, English cricket revolves around the Ashes to a very great degree, and they'll be looking ahead to the next series, and they'll be telling themselves they haven't had any success in trying to find successors to either Broad or Anderson, and they need to get to work on that.
They do. I'm just wondering about some of their genuine quicks and where they are at the moment. I haven't seen for a little while.
Jofra Archer doesn't seem to play. He's always injured.
Yeah, he's just got injury problems.
Ollie Robinson has the goods but doesn't produce them often enough, doesn't look interested enough, and doesn't look fit enough. And they've had a few others. The other bloke who can bowl quickly for 4 overs, Mark Wood, is okay, but
yeah, you can't. They virtually can't. If they've got 2 tests fairly close together, they can't play him in the second one. They can play him in one or not the other, not both. All right. Look, just finally, Travis Head is just spanking balls out of the park for fun at the moment for Hyderabad Sunrisers, and as is. And of course, over the next, by the end of this month, Jack, we'll have the T20 ICC World Cup being played in the West Indies. That'll be exciting. But Jake Fraser McGurk wasn't good enough to get a Guernsey.
As with all these World Cups, I'll get excited about semi-final time.
Oh no, the early stuff's the good stuff, mate. On the small Caribbean islands, you just kind of wish you were there. Watching a bit of cricket at St Kitts, just wonderful stuff. All right, take us out, Jack.
This is David Burge. You no doubt saw the footage of the outside and inside of the Eurovision Song Contest.
I try and avoid the topic, but I did see some of this. Yes,
Malmo with the mob howling about the Israeli young Israeli woman singing.
It wasn't fun.
And this comment on social media, I'm kind of torn here because the Eurovision Song Contest may be the only thing worse than Hummer.
It's not flashes. All I know is the one thing he said these fuckers really can't stand is the idea of a Jew at a music festival. Oh, all jokes aside, participating in this barely a micrometer removed from marching at a Klan parade. Whoa, he's gone. Burge, but we'd like a bit of that every now and then. Well, that takes us out for episode 73. Thanks for listening, listeners. And don't forget, if you want to drop us a line, please feel free to do so. And you can get hold of me on my X, formerly known as Twitter, at Jack the Insider. My DMs are always open. But Jack, I've just got a bit of a word from our good mate CD. I'll just call him CD. I don't know if he wants to be announced his name or announced. Probably not after this. But here's what he said, Jack. Really enjoyed the last 2 Jacks. It's a busy time around the world. Although HKJ, that's you, seems to be a bit quieter than normal.
A bit quieter.
Yeah, well, it was high praise. I think it was mainly for me, but you're doing okay. I think that's good. That's the way. But look, I did miss. We don't just need praise. I need some praise. I need quite a lot of praise. But if you want to give us a belting too, and particularly Jack, just slide into my DMs.
Well, I did miss a Substack last week due to a bit of illness. But I'll be back, and he can jump back on there. There'll be one going up today or tomorrow. He can jump back on there and insult me all he likes.
I don't know that it's his go, but anyway, he's a massive Swans fan too, Jack. So you've got that in common. Living in Western Australia, but massive Swans fan.
Just before we go, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have been down in Nigeria.
I didn't. What was that? Something to do with an email scam?
No. Well, although there seem to be plenty of princes in Nigeria because they're always writing to me.
Just look. If you give me a bit of cash now, I'll give you a lot back later.
Yeah. The Duchess has had the test done, and she's 43% Nigerian.
Is she? Yeah. Is she? Oh well. God bless her. So it might be she might be leading a few email scams along the way. All right, well, that takes us out. Thanks, listeners, once again, and we look forward to bringing you 2 Jacks number 74 next week. See ya.